Following back-to-back disappointing losses for the Toronto Maple Leafs, head coach Craig Berube has made multiple moves ahead of tonight's matchup against the Boston Bruins. And a couple of these moves might surprise you, as one Leaf is making his debut for the season tonight. So we're going to break down those moves and discuss what exactly they are, as they are coming off of a very brutal stretch of couple of games over the past few days. Stay tuned for all that in this episode. Before we get into it, quick reminder to hit the subscribe button. If you're a part of the 70% who aren't subscribed to the channel, it's the place to be for daily Leafs content. Make sure to smash that subscribe button. We're on the road now to 14,000 subscribers. But Darius, we have a lot to go over today, specifically surrounding the Toronto Maple Leafs lines. And quite frankly, they've been very disappointing over the past couple of games, whether that's the top line, whether that's even the defense to a degree. But they're shaking things up tonight ahead of the huge matchup against the Boston Bruins, a team that has not been performing well. You can see it there at the bottom. 3-4-1 this season for the Boston Bruins. And quite frankly, it's been disappointing for both teams to start the season. I think a 4-4 start's not ideal, but ahead of tonight's game, you can look at the lines here. Nyes, Matthews, Marner, McMahon, Domi, Nylander, Pacioretty, Tavares, Robertson, Lorentz, Kampf, Reeves. But Philip Myers makes his debut. Stolarz is getting back in there. And we also have some updates on the Yanni Hakanpää and Connor Dewar front. They are nearing a return. But Darius, Craig Berube has finally made some interesting changes here. Most notably, Philip Myers sliding in. And if anything else, I'm probably videoing this tomorrow or very soon. Timothy Liljegren's time in Toronto is almost certainly up at this point. But that's a bit of a story for another day. Philip Myers slides in to get his debut. Timmins out.
Another big story coming into tonight, too, is I cannot remember the last time that the Leafs and Bruins played a game, a regular season game, where both of them were not in a playoff spot. And that's going to happen tonight, which is it's a rarity, especially over the last 15 years or so. So pretty interesting there. But yeah, Craig Berube made some changes coming into today. And we were talking about it, before the season even started, that the Leafs have a lot of flexibility with their roster, getting guys like Hakanpää obviously not playing tonight, that they were going to use in certain games against teams who were more physical, like the Boston Bruins. So I was kind of expecting a change in this way against the Boston Bruins. Obviously, Holmberg has kind of lost his game. I think he's still a very useful player and can bring a lot of really good things to the lineup. But the last couple of games, he has not been impressive. Not even impressive. He's lost his game a little bit, right? And he's not necessarily the most physical player. I think he can play physically, but in terms of, him versus Max Pacioretty, you probably want that veteran presence back in the lineup. And I think Pacioretty is an underrated physical player and gets to the dirty areas too. So I'm glad to see him back in the lineup. But the most interesting move is we're going to see a Leaf make his debut tonight, and that is Philippe Meyer on the back end, which was pretty interesting. And it's him and Benoit. So we know exactly what those two are going to do all night, exactly when they're going to be put on the ice and what they're going to be told to do. So it's going to be interesting to watch if Myers, because at times to me, he looked a little slower in preseason. But the other storyline we get out of that is Timothy Liljegren. Like you said, yes, we'll make another video on that. That's a whole different video. That's a whole different story. Looks like his time is up because he's slipped so far down the depth chart here that even when guys are coming out of the lineup when they're healthy, it's a guy like Philip Meyer coming into the lineup. So very interesting stuff. And he's a physical guy. It's going to be very interesting to see how the Leafs play tonight, because we know what the message is. It's going to be check, right? You got to check against the Bruins. So it's either they do or they're going to lose.
Yeah, and like you mentioned here, Pontus Holmberg, Connor Timmins staying out late at the skate. Appears like there will be scratches tonight in Boston. Pacioretty is returning following his injury. And something else to note is that Anthony Stolarz is also expected to make a start. But I want to touch on a couple other things here. If you look at the defensive pairings, and according to these projected lines, some major shakeups are going down surrounding the blue line. You now have Tanev on the second pairing. You have OEL paired with Morgan Riley. Darius, there's a lot of moving pieces here, and I'm a little bit surprised about this. I think the defense has been solid so far. A bit of a rough past couple nights for them, but you have Benoit now moved down to the third pairing, like you mentioned. You have McCabe and Tanev, and then Riley and OEL, which is a very offensive-minded top pairing for the Toronto Maple Leafs here. But they're really making a lot of moves ahead of tonight's game against Boston. That being said, the top line is still the same. They haven't made the most notable and maybe the most obvious move, but we'll leave that for another day. Riley, OEL, and McCabe, Tanev. That's an interesting one, sliding Tanev down to the second line.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And coming into the season, we talked about it ad nauseum too, that, every single defensive pairing was yin and yang, right? You had an offensive guy with a defensive guy, an offensive guy with a defensive guy, and so on and so forth, right? And now they've kind of moved to each defensive pairing has an identity. All offense with OEL and Morgan Riley, all defense with McCabe and Tanev, and, that hard-nosed play and the kind of physicality. And then that last pairing is literally just go out there and beat up guys, right? There is no puck moving on that last pairing whatsoever. So it's going to be very interesting to see, because I knew that they were going to make some lineup changes based on who they were playing playing so far this season. And I don't know if they've really played a team that's, known for their physicality like Boston is in Boston, right? So, and obviously this is a team you want to make a good impression, not even a good impression. You have to come in and win this game. This game is going to tell you a lot about the Leafs mentality because this is the team that beat you in the playoffs and you're back in their building. So you want to win this game, and it's going to be interesting to watch. But the defense pairings, yeah, very interesting. They're going to try it out. I feel like they'll probably revert back to the way they were because besides 2 games, they really weren't that bad. I thought they were doing pretty well. And I'm not sure that the the whole identity thing works for the defensive pairings where you go all offense. You might run into some trouble there with Riley and OEL. So we'll see how that shakes out. But it's interesting. A couple of these pairings definitely have identity. We'll just see if it works out tonight.
Yeah, and it's gonna be one of the more interesting games, probably the most interesting game, just aside from game 1 for the Toronto Maple Leafs so far this year, and they need to get a win. And luckily for a lot of Leafs fans out there, including, of course, myself and notable Stolar's lover, he is back. He is very much back. He's missed, not that he missed. He was held out of the past 2 games against the Jackets, obviously with Hildeby and then Joseph Wall in the game a couple nights ago on Thursday. But there's Anthony Stolarz is back, desperately needed. I'm thinking he's going to be the goaltender going forward now. Obviously, Wall's probably going to factor into a couple games down the line, but they desperately need to win. They call on Anthony Stolarz, and I think this is their plan all along. He got now like 4 or 5 days of rest in between starts, so he should be fresh now. Whether that will disrupt his rhythm, I doubt, because he's obviously used to being a backup goaltender where they go multiple days without playing. So if there's someone prepared to do it, it's him. But Anthony Stolarz back in net is huge for this team, and desperately need a win tonight against the Bruins. Even though we're only this will be the 9th game of the year. It feels like one of the many must wins for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
I've talked about it a lot so far in this young season that, the Atlantic Division is wide open right now, besides the Florida Panthers, who are number 1, right? Like the Leafs need some points here. They need to win. And besides all that, you're playing the Bruins. You want to win this game. And obviously for Stolarz, goaltending is a lot of the mental game, right? He needed some mental rest. Not that he needed it, but it's good to get it sometimes. Maybe don't feed him to the Wolves in, Columbus and obviously the St. Louis game. Just get Woll back in there, right? Hopefully get him feeling good. Obviously it didn't happen that way. But Stolarz, where we saw him last, feeling pretty good. Right? He lost, yes, in that game against the New York Rangers, but it wasn't his fault, and he played a pretty good game. He's played a really good season so far, like nothing to dislike from Anthony Stolar's game. So I think he's built up trust with the fan base, and he's playing with a lot of confidence. So coming into this game, I think he's going to play really well, and we'll see how the team in front of him responds, because a couple of changes, but again, I firmly believe that everything goes through your goaltender. If he's playing calm and with confidence, the rest of the team will follow suit.
Yeah, and one other note before we wrap up here is Connor Dewar and Yanni Hakanpää joined the Leafs for the 2-game road trip. Neither are eligible to play, as both have to wait 3 games, including tonight, before they are eligible to come off a long-term injured reserve. But we are now 5 days away then from that date where they have to make these moves, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens, because I would not be surprised if over the next week or in about a week's time, Connor Dewar is factoring into these lines, because again, Pontus Holmberg hasn't showed much. There's been some other guys. David Kampf hasn't shown too much. He was healthy scratching last game, or the game before last game. And ultimately, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. And again, Yanni Hakanpää is another guy. If they like the way that this looks, realistically, you could slide in Yanni Hakanpää, and he's probably just a better version of Philip Myers, depending. I'm not going to take away credit from Myers, but very similar play styles, obviously. And if it works well, maybe they continue to ride that. But let us know in the comments your thoughts are on this. A lot more changes than I expected ahead of tonight's game this earlier in the season. But I'm like that I'm seeing, Craig Berube make some moves. Let us know what your thoughts are down below. We'll see you later.